All right, this is after Paul and Silas were put in jail. So they are in jail, starting at verse 25. Along about midnight, Paul and Silas were at prayer and singing a robust hymn to God. The other prisoners couldn't believe their ears. Then, without warning, a huge earthquake. The jailhouse tottered and every door flew open. All the prisoners were set loose. Startled from their sleep, the jailer saw all the doors swinging loose on their hinges. Assuming that all the prisoners had escaped, he pulled out his sword. He was about to do himself in, figuring he was as good as dead anyways. And then Paul stopped him. "Don't do that. We're all still here. Nobody's running away." The jailer got a torch and he ran inside. Badly shaken, he collapsed in front of Paul and Silas. He led them out of the jail and asked, "Sirs, what do I have to do to be rescued, to really live?" And they said, "Put your entire trust in the Master Jesus. Then you'll live as you were meant to live, and everyone in your house included." This is the word of the Lord. Have you ever watched a movie and you didn't know it was going to be a musical until that first song popped in? Has that ever happened to you before? When it first happens and you're watching a movie, it's kind of jarring because they start to sing and you're thinking, "What? Are you kidding? Wait a second, hold on," because you're like, now you're guessing, what genre am I watching here? It's really weird. And at first you're thinking, is this a comedy or is this a musical? Because it's just so out there. It's like there's a glitch in reality. But then as you continue to watch the movie, you begin to realize, oh, this is natural. This is just what we do when we feel things. We sing. Our words in this reality aren't enough to really express our emotions, and so we need musical notes, and we need musical energy, and we need dancing to really express our emotions. And it's sort of like a sort of freedom in the movie. And at a certain point, you begin to feel like the musical is more real life than real life is, even though they're singing these corny songs and dancing throughout the movie. And so my question is, what if the reason why some of us are struggling or anxious or depressed is because we're not living in the right genre in our lives? What genre would you say your life is? What story are you living? And what would happen if, starting today, the rest of your life was going to be a musical? Start off thinking, well, is this a comedy or is this a musical? Until you realize that music is the way that you can express yourself. Maybe sometimes that reality can feel more real than the reality before. You want to know what the number one command in the Bible is? The number one command in the Bible. Does anyone have a guess? The number one command in the Bible is, over 400 times, the Bible says to sing. To sing. It says, sing to the Lord. Sing a new song. Sing praises to Him. Sing to Him. Sing to one another. Sing together. Sing aloud. Come into His presence with singing. Sing with instruments. Sing with joy. Sing for joy. Sing with your spirit. Sing from your heart. Sing with your understanding. Sing in the morning. Sing in times of suffering. Sing so that the nations can hear you. Sing about His love and sing about His faithfulness. Sing about His greatness and His glory. Sing about His salvation and His justice. Sing about His wisdom and His principles. It says sing over 400 times. The next four of the 5 commands that is most common in Scripture, number 1 is sing. Number 2 is praise, which is pretty much used almost entirely to talk about singing, at least, I'd say most of the time. The third command then is to do not be afraid. And then number 4 is give thanks, which giving thanks is something that you can do through singing. And then the 5th command is to rejoice, which, by the way, you can do through singing. I was actually personally surprised that love was not the number 1 command in the Bible. It's not even in the top 5. But what if the recipe for creating the love that we need in our hearts to give to others? What if the recipe is singing? What if we create love in our hearts through singing and praising and giving thanks and rejoicing? This morning I got up extra early to prepare my sermon, and I was at the kitchen, and it was dark outside, and I began to hear birds singing right outside the window. And I was like, wow, spring is really here. It's really starting to hit, because it was the first time I noticed birds singing, especially that early in the morning. Spring has this way of bringing life into our life. It's easier to be happy when it's warmer outside. It's harder to be negative. And it's just being outside is nice. You begin to see the animals becoming more active, but really the birds make a huge impact because it's like they're always out there. They're always singing. They're always celebrating. And even if you're not paying attention, there's a subconscious thing about hearing the birds. It just kind of makes you feel a little happier. It just kind of lifts your mood. Because when you are around singing, it's harder to be negative. When I went to Africa, and I've been to Africa 3 times, I've spent over 6 months in Africa. And before I left, I didn't realize how much singing would be a part of their culture. But I got to travel a lot, and I got to do a lot of things in Africa. And I'd walk around the city, and I went to different villages and different towns. And what I found was that every church I'd walk by, every school, every group of children, every time I'd go to someone's house, singing was a part of every single one of those places. All the time. Every class, every subject, there's a song to be sung in the schools. It was constant, and it made the culture very addicting because they were just happy all the time. And then I would hang out with Americans in Africa, and they just didn't seem like they had the same level of joy in their lives. So why were they happy with so little when Americans were so happy, or were so unhappy with so much? And I ask, do they sing because they're happy, or are they happy because they sing? What would happen if our culture began to sing them like that? What if all cultures around the world began to sing like that? Have we lost that? Did we used to be like that? And if you think about it, you're watching the movies, you often see the enslaved Africans that were forced over here. As they're working in the cotton fields, they're singing these spirituals. And so it almost makes it look like they were the ones that came here and sang, but we didn't sing. But I began to look in the history this week, and I began to find out that we have a very surprising history, because in America, almost every industry, people would sing at work. They would sing together in the factories and in the textile mills, because it was helpful to make sure the movements in the factories were synchronized. The farmers would sing, and the sailors, and the blacksmiths, and the laborers. Soldiers would sing, and you do see that one in the movies. Railway workers would sing. You see that in the movies. But every industry had songs that they would sing together because it would boost the morale. It would increase productivity. People were more likely to sing at church. They were more likely to sing at home. So what happened? Why did we lose that? At what point did our culture begin to lose our song? The factories began to get louder. We started to have to wear hearing protection. People in the office needed to be able to think because they're working, more white-collar work requires more mental capacity, and so they need more silence. They need to start making phone calls, which means you don't want to interrupt the phone call singing out loud. So we slowly started to lose that at work. But the truth is we've lost singing. Humans have been singing through all of human history, and modern history today was the first time that has been taken from us. How did we lose that? If you think about it, you go back 150 years ago or any longer than that. If you wanted to hear music, the only way you could hear music was if you created it. You had to create it, so you had to sing it. At first radios, when they first began to make their ways at home, I wonder if they knew the impact that easy music would have on the human psyche and what it meant to be human. Because instead of gathering together as families to sing, they would gather as families around the radio to listen. And then jukeboxes began to fill the bars and the diners. So we're not going to be singing in those public spaces anymore. And then we got cassette tapes, which allowed us to listen to music while we're in our cars. And then the Walkman came out, and we were able to just carry it with us in our headphones, and everyone had their own personal music. And now everyone has their own smartphones on them. They have access, we all have access to over, we don't know the exact amount, but it's somewhere between 500 million and 1 billion songs available for free on the internet. You can listen to anything at any time, anywhere. And we can listen to them on these kinds of speakers here. And these speakers that we have now have a better sound quality than a live concert would have had 150 years ago. So we've become passive listeners rather than active partakers in singing. We've become consumers to singing. Singing is the thing that now it's for the professionals to do. So we sit back, we listen, we put the professionals up on a pedestal because that's what they do. And then, as you know, a lot of them are auto-tuned, which has created a certain level of impossible standards. There's a perfectionism that we now all expect in singing, so why would I ever sing when what everybody wants to hear is something that sounds so crisp and so clear and so perfect? We've all become so self-conscious to sing. And so as a culture, we've lost our talent. You know, go to Africa, every single person sings so beautiful. And we come here, and what is it? 1 or 2 out of 100 can sing to the same or close to the same degree. And then that talent just cycles us into less and less singing. Has anybody ever seen that video that's very public? It shows up on my feed all the time. There's an elderly couple, and they're on the airplane. And the husband has dementia. And he begins to start panicking. He's on the airplane, and there's too many people. He begins to get violent, and his wife begins to sing to him. He begins to sing, "Sunshine, you are my sunshine." It was a song from their wedding. And he began to calm, but he was still not completely calm. And then everyone in the airplane began to sing, and he got calm. It's just a beautiful video. Singing has power. It has power. The last 4 Sundays, I have been talking about why we come here on Sunday mornings. Why we come here. And what we do when we come here. That first Sunday I talked about why we come here, and it was to give God the glory He deserves. I said that we come to church on Sundays not because we are pursuing God, but because He is pursuing us. And then there's 3 things that we do when we come here together. The first one, which was the next week, is we come here to realign our focus and our reality with God's reality. Our reality is faulty and it's false. And when we come here, we leave our false reality behind. The negative voices, the fears that we live in, we leave that behind, and we begin to be able to see the world through God's reality, through His peace and His love and His hope. We orbit ourselves around God's gravitational system. The next week I then said the other thing that we do when we come here is that we connect deeply with our family, with the members of this community in a safe space. We need us. Everybody needs an us. We need a tribe. It's something that we need as human beings. And then finally, this week, I'm concluding this sort of series on why we come here. And so today, the reason we come on Sunday mornings is to honestly pour out our deepest emotions of our hearts to God through creative expression. Now, I didn't intend, when I was starting on the sermon, I didn't intend for it to be focused on singing, because we can express our deepest emotions of our heart through dancing and through playing instruments, and we can do it through arts and crafts, which we have around the sanctuary here, old arts and crafts that those of previous generations have gifted to us. You've got acting, and then there's improv, which is a part of acting, but improv, that's really just a fancy way for adults to play pretend. And then you have writing, all kinds of writing, poetry, stories, narrative, gardening, humor. Anything that gets us into the heart space is the place that we need to be when we come here on Sunday morning. But throughout Christian history, we have a long history where the church, what we tend to focus on more than anything else is singing. Now, I suppose you could have a church where the focus is dancing. It's a dancing church. We play music and we come and we dance. That could happen. We could do that. I saw a lot of that in Africa. We could have a church where the focus is improv acting or stand-up comedy. Those would be fun churches. But there's something special about singing. You can sing when you're alone. You can sing in your head. You can sing anywhere. You can sing when you're in jail. Just like Paul and Silas in our scripture today. They were in jail. And they decided to sing. Why were they in jail? Well, what happened was they were traveling and they came across a slave girl, and they could tell that she was demon-possessed. And she had a master, and her master was making all kinds of money because she was doing some she was able to do some fortune telling because she was demon-possessed. And Paul and Silas decided to free her from that demon, which of course made the master furious because now he's no longer making income from her fortune telling. So the master grabbed a couple people, they dragged Paul and Silas to the authorities, they lied about what they were doing, and they got put into prison without a trial. They were put into the inner prison on the deepest, most level of the prison, which was probably some sort of cave. They had a maximum security. It says that they were putting foot clamps around their ankles. Do you ever feel in your life like you're imprisoned? Like you're trapped? Like the world around you is unfairly attacking you? Did you do good things with good intentions, but then the people didn't understand them and then turned against you? Paul and Silas knows what that feels like. We live in a world where we have a system that can be so oppressive. We have a system that wants people to be slaves to the system. We have a system that wants us to be imprisoned. That is what sin is. But what did Paul and Silas do in that situation? They sang. They sang. Why did they sing? Because when you're singing, you cannot be enslaved. When you're singing, you cannot be imprisoned because on the inside, you are free. And so Paul and Silas, they were singing to God, worshiping God, because they were free human beings that was bought by the blood of Jesus. And what happened because they were singing? There was an earthquake, the doors flung open, their chains fell loose. And it wasn't just for Paul and Silas. It had a domino effect. It happened for everybody that was in jail around them. That is what happens when we sing. It shatters the false reality around us. It breaks the chains in our lives. It destroys everything that's holding us back. I often hear that here at St. John's, we used to have this huge choir. We used to have singing here. Maybe the path to being a singing church again is not in hiring some hotshot choir director, but it starts with you. You first. It starts with me. Me first. We need to be singing at home. We need to be singing in the shower. We need to be singing in the car. What if you made a resolve that every time you ever hear a song with words that you know, you are going to sing it. You're not going to allow yourself to just listen and just be passive. You're going to sing it. every time. A bunch of scientists got together and they began hooking up EKG devices to trees. And what they found out was that trees produce these bioelectrical signals. The trees are actually communicating with each other, but they couldn't quite understand what the trees were saying and what they were communicating. And so the scientists were dumbfounded on how to figure out what the trees' language was, how to find patterns. And they didn't make a lot of progress for a very long time. And then one scientist came along and was like, well, what if we begin to listen as if the trees were singing? And then all of a sudden they began to make all these breakthroughs because they began to find harmonies and structures. They could begin to hear patterns in their changes. And they were able to detect when the trees were supporting each other or warning each other from dangers and when they were interacting with each other. In our forests and in our world, our trees are singing to each other. They're singing with each other. And so the birds are singing, the whales and the dolphins are singing, insects, crickets and cicadas, they're singing, animals are singing. They sing whenever they want to mate or to warn or to connect with each other or to fight. All of life is singing in some way. If we are not going to sing, then we're not going to be human. We are not going to be alive. We're not human if we don't sing. If we're not singing, we're living in a contradiction to all of the cosmos that God has created. The cosmos around us is singing. And so if we want to be alive, we need to sing too. Now I want to tell you a little bit about my second favorite TV show, but I'm not going to tell you what the name of it is because it's going to ruin the show for you if you ever watch it. So if you want to know what it is, ask me after the sermon. I'll tell you what show this is. But in the show, a man dies and he gets trapped in purgatory. And he spends the entire episode trying to get out of purgatory and get back to his life. And for whatever reason, he thinks the solution to getting back to life is becoming an international assassin. So he begins taking missions, he begins assassinating people, he stops a nuclear bomb attack, and he's just living his purgatory life in survival mode, frantic, in a panic, trying to get out of purgatory and back into his life. And then he begins to realize that no matter what he does to save the world, none of it is giving him his life back. And so he gives up, he goes to the bar, he's about to get completely drunk, and a man at the bar says, you know, if you want to get out of here, all you have to do is sing. Of course, he says, I don't believe you. And then the man says, why not? And he's like, because that's stupid. Why would you have to sing to get back to life? That doesn't make any sense. And the man says, what, is that not elegant enough for you? Is that too easy? And the karaoke was going on during this conversation. And the woman who was just singing the last song gets up and she's like, would you like to sing the next song? And he gets up and he begins to sing. And it's interesting because he's not a terrible singer, but I've never seen a TV show that didn't have, it's 3 minutes of just camera on him singing. It's not a great song, and if you watch just that clip, you would be like, why is this on television? Because he wasn't the best musician. But it was one of the most touching moments in the whole show because all of his bent-up trauma that he had been pushing down and running away from, all came to the surface through the song. So the message, I believe, that the writers of that show was trying to say was, if you want to come back to life, the secret is to sing. What if you started living your life today as if it was a musical? What if the rest of your life moving forward was like a musical? Singing is the number one most common command in the Bible. What if that one spiritual breakthrough that you're waiting for in your life, all you have to do to receive that is just to sing? It's springtime right now, and the birds are out there. They're spreading their joy with the world. What if the one secret for you to finally lift yourself out of the depression for good was to sing? families are singing together in Africa, and their families are happier than your family. What if the secret to having a happy family was that you began to sing with your family? Our ancestors at this church, in our jobs, in our schools, they all sang. What if the way that we get that back into our schools, our jobs, and our church was with us? If we are the ones that begin to start ourselves by singing. The animals and the trees, everything out there that is alive is singing. What if you are never truly human unless you join them and sing with them? If you're feeling trapped, if you feel dead inside, if you feel like you are trapped in purgatory, what if the one thing to get that back in your life, the one thing to get back to the life, is to sing? Singing is what caused the miracle of the earthquakes for Paul and Silas. What if singing is what's going to finally break the chains in your life? What if singing is the thing that's going to finally pull you from everything that's been holding you back? But not just you, but the people around you. If you want to be alive again, maybe the thing you need to do is sing.